And I just want to say thank you for everyone for coming today and joining us for the Community Projects feedback session with Lucas Morneau. So Biofeedback and Art Placement Gallery and their team, Levi and Melody, would like to thank Sask Arts for the funding of this project.
Great. So I would like to give a little land acknowledgement before we get going. Obviously, Lucas is in Ktaqamkuk.
In Mi'kma'ki at the moment.
Okay, and in Mi'kma'ki land. So we'd like to acknowledge that on the land that which we are meeting is Treaty 6 territory, home to numerous First Nations, including Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, and the Métis Nations. Biofeedback recognizes the current and long history of colonialism in Canada and our own positionality in different places and spaces within that context. We just want to express our gratitude for everybody attending today, no matter where you're attending this Zoom from. And moving on, I'm going to just introduce Lucas's prompts for his session. So the creative prompts that Lucas gave us there's three. The first one is, how do you balance activist work with your own well-being? Something to think about as we go through his slides. The second one is, how can you take up an activist role while ensuring you don't burn yourself out? And the third is, how is your work accessible and understandable to the masses?
Okay, I'm just going to quickly introduce Lucas. So Lucas is a queer interdisciplinary artist and curator of English-Newfoundlander and Quebeçois European settler descent, who's originally from Ktaqamkuk, Newfoundland and Labrador. They received their Bachelor of Fine Arts at Memorial University, which is the Grenfell Campus, in 2016. And their Masters of Fine Arts at the U of S in 2018, which is where we all kind of overlapped with Lucas or met him in some capacity. They won multiple awards, including 2016 BMO First Art Award for Newfoundland and Labrador, and the 2018 Cox and Palmer Pivotal Point Grant. Their work has been supported by the Canada Council, as well as Arts Newfoundland and Arts New Brunswick. So through drag and masquerade, like their alter ego, the queer mummer, their work explores gender performativity with issues surrounding hegemonic masculinity and its effects on gender expression and identity, employing several mediums, including but not limited to photography, fiber art, performance, video, installation, printmaking, and sculpture to deconstruct homophobic and transphobic attitudes still prevalent throughout Western culture. So Lucas is currently, as Kelsey said, based in Mi'kma'ki lands, and this is where they're working as the production manager at Struts Gallery. So please join me in welcoming Lucas.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me virtually in Treaty 6. I come from you live in Mi'kma'ki, in the Signic region, which is Sackville, New Brunswick. And as I said before, I was born and raised in Dundalk, which is colloquially known as Newfoundland and Labrador. And I guess I'll talk about my work, and in that time, I'll sort of discuss some of these questions or these prompts that I've given you all. And yeah, let's get to it. So I guess I should probably start off with the how I came about coming up with the queer mummer, which was mentioned in my bio. And actually all comes back to Saskatoon, which is great. So as I did my master's in Saskatoon from between 2016 and 2018. I was lucky enough to go into my master's straight out of my BFA, but I was quite young. At that time, I had not come out to my parents. I had been living the secret queer life. And I moved to Saskatoon, and a few of my friends started taking me to drag shows, and then all of a sudden I started to perform in drag. I don't have any photos here. And during that time, I really enjoyed drag. Before that, I had been a cosplayer, so I would dress up in costumes, whether it be like Robin or like Aquaman, some anime characters, and make my own outfits and do these costumes. But I found one of the things I didn't like about it was that I was doing other people's characters, and I wasn't, creating my own looks and everything. And drag really sort of helped me fill that role of the creative aspect of costume making and stuff. And everything was great. I think it was 2017. I was performing in the winter and spring. And then in the summer, I went home back to Newfoundland for a bit, just to visit my parents. And I ordered some stuff for drag. And a course that I ordered accidentally arrived to my parents' place, which outed me both as queer and as a drag queen, which was a great day. We love those days, those traumatic days happening all at once. And the reception wasn't the best, mostly to the drag. Me being queer was fine. It was, there's still a lot of, I would say, like, gender binary, gender roles are quite enforced in Newfoundland still. And so drag, even now, is still sort of looked down upon. People push all kinds of weird stereotypes onto it, which we're starting to see sort of pop up now in the US. But anyway, that happened, and I went back to Saskatoon, feeling a little bit defeated about drag, and I was told basically to quit doing it. And I started to take a course with Joan Borsa, and I was knitting an outfit for drag. And for some reason in my head, I was making this mask. I was like, this sort of reminds me of mummering. And I had this sort of click in my head. For those who don't know, mummering is a practice that happens in Newfoundland around Christmas time, where people will dress up in disguises. Generally, there's gender play or cross-dressing, as people tend to call it, where men will dress as women and women as men. You can kind of see an example of some members there on the left. They'll go to their neighbors' homes where they'll perform and play mean tricks while the neighbors have to guess who they are, feed them food and alcohol. And once the guessing game is done, they move on to the next house. And so I felt it was quite not stereotypical, but hypocritical that this was a practice that was heavily, accepted and celebrated in Newfoundland, to the point where you can find them with tchotchkes and little knickknacks whenever you go to stores for tourist reasons. And it was something that was accepted, but then drag was looked down upon, even though both are forms of drag. There's gender play within drag, obviously, and there's gender play within mummering. So, sorry, my cat wants to go inside, so let me just, she pushed the door open. There we go. I knew Elsa was going to cause some issues with this. But, so I decided to blend both of these pieces, and I created something called the Queer Mummer. And for those who, I guess, know me from Saskatoon, know about this project, so I'm not going to stick around into it for too long. But I do want to kind of point out, the two images on the left, or the one image on the right here from the Roman d'Alexandre, which was created in the 14th century. Mummering is a practice that's been around for quite a long time. It has its roots in folk theater, and the gender play happens because for a long time women were not allowed to perform on stage. And we saw this in theater up until the age of opera. And when women were allowed to perform on stage, it's not like drag stopped happening. In fact, it flourished. And we saw, women dressing in drag, and there were quite a lot of famous actresses that would normally perform in drag. So I created this persona called the Queer Mummers during 2017 and 2018. I created this specific series. This was my thesis work. And during this time, you'll kind of start to see like sort of remnants of like newer projects I've been working on that sort of came out of ideas from this. But I started to blend aspects of Newfoundland culture and folklore with aspects of queer culture and queer history. So I'll start with the mummer on the right. This is one of the first ones I made. This is Inky Twinkie, who for this I kind of wanted to look at sort of like queer icons and sort of talk about them, especially ones that are sort of forgotten in history. I feel like, I don't know, if it's the us millennials or Gen Z, we tend to celebrate a lot of, I guess, current stars who are like allies, but never really celebrate those people who are actually within the community. So with Inky Twinkie, I wanted to play with The Little Mermaid and Ursula the Sea Witch, because Ursula the Sea Witch was actually based upon a drag queen, Divine. If you've watched Pink Flamingos, Female Trouble, Hairspray, the original one, you know who Divine is. Divine was probably the most famous drag queen up until the era of RuPaul, and sort of set the standard for like makeup and things like that. And so I wanted to pay homage to Divine in this work. So the makeup is inspired by Divine. The outfit is sort of sleazy in a sense of Divine, with ripped tights and you know, basically just showing crotch. Yeah, with that one there, I should mention that all the outfits, for the most part, are crocheted. During this time, I taught myself to crochet because I knew how to knit, but I didn't know how to knit in the 3D sense. I could knit panels, but I wasn't going to quickly create outfits just knitting panels and putting them together. So I taught myself to crochet and started to make these looks. On the left is Fag Hag, which comes up later, but it's a bit of a portmanteau of two slurs, fag and hag, which actually itself became a slur. And I was interested in how pejoratives and slurs sometimes are used within communities as either inside jokes or as little nicknames, and how they are then taken by a majority community and then used against those communities. And so fag hag was one that was originally used within queer communities to describe women who hung out with gay men, but then started to be used against them. And so I was interested in that, and also the folklore of the old hag, which is based around sleep paralysis. In Newfoundland, we call it the old hag. And there's like stories about this hag sitting on you, which is sleep paralysis. And funny enough, sort of getting into our prompts, I was hagged in June, or I was about to be hagged, and it was my first experience with it. And I'll go into the details of that night because that was a specific day in June. It was the day of a funeral, so I feel like something was in the air. I don't know. Anyway, as I said, I crocheted a lot of these outfits, and I was that person who didn't know what they were going to do for their masters up until the last year. So I really put that pressure upon myself to sort of get this work done. And I kind of want to talk about that because it's not a healthy habit. You know, I love the robe that I made in the top left corner, which is a part of Fruit Loop, which is named after the Fruit Loop in Saskatoon. If I'm not going to reveal what that is if people don't know what it is, but it's near the YWCA. But you know, that's an outfit that I made, I think, within 2 months. And was that something healthy to do? Probably not. At that time, I was pretty new to crochet. I didn't know about doing proper stretches, even though I knew I was supposed to be doing it, you know, making sure my body was not tightened up or cramped up. And that's something that's later on really bit me in the butt in my career. This past year has been quite hard for me to work in my fiber art practice. You know, I'm sort of used to sitting down and crocheting for the whole day. And one thing is that a lot of people sort of forget like their posture and how they're sitting when they're working on these things. And I quickly learned how that really affects your mental health, well-being, and your physical health. And I'll get into that a little bit later as well, because it's a bit more relevant with a future series that I'm going to talk about within this. I also have Allah on the bottom there, which is also sort of one of the first outfits that I made. And a lot of Allah was based off sort of the saying we have in Newfoundland. If you see something in the distance, instead of saying, oh, look, you say, oh, Allah. But if you see something that's cute in the distance, you say, Allah. So that's sort of what that one was based off of. I kind of want to zoom past these so I can kind of talk a bit more about the prompts. But I also had this feeling during the project. One of the questions I got from Newfoundlanders was, mummers usually use veils of some sort to disguise themselves, whereas in drag we use makeup, and whether or not there was a difference, or if makeup didn't truly veil the face that much. And so I felt it was important to document these makeup looks that I was doing to sort of reference that veiling or that masquerade. And so I ended up taking makeup wipes, and whenever I did a look, I would literally put the wipe on my face and like beat my face and do a mono print essentially of the makeup print, so that it sort of showed that veiling after that event happened. And some of these veils actually have funny stories to them. The one in the center happened while I actually participated in a drag competition at Divas in Saskatoon. It was, I think, like Drag Queen of the Year or something like that. Miss Divas, I forget the name. And one of the judges completely dismissed my drag because I didn't wear wigs, because I wore masks and stuff like that, and just called me a bald queen. So the next day during the coronation, I ended up just writing bald queen on my forehead. And I documented that with the veil. So it's funny that the reason why I kind of kept that around is because these gender norms, or these assumptions about, this is the correct way of doing gender, this is not the correct way of doing gender, they also are prevalent within queer communities and within the drag scene. And you still see it within famous shows like RuPaul's Drag Race, where there is a lack of contestants who have facial hair or who are trans, so, or drag kings, no drag kings, it's not RuPaul's Drag Queen race, it's RuPaul's Drag Race. There's a whole complete, dismissal of drag kings within that. So I felt it was important to sort of talk about that as well, because obviously these gender norms are all around us, and especially if you're playing with gender in such a way, you shouldn't be putting yourself into such a strict box. You say, you are playing with drag. You shouldn't say like, oh, well, it has to be this, otherwise it's not proper drag, right? So that sort of happened with that series, and that's kind of why I stuck around. But I finished that work. I finished my thesis. There was a lot more outfits, but some of them will pop up later on. And it was all fine and dandy, and pack up and go back to Newfoundland. And I started to feel these sort of toxic pressures again to perform masculinity the proper way. And I had felt like I was essentially being told to wear a masculine mask and to pretend not to be my true self. And how queer people are sort of viewed within society. I felt like that was starting to come into my life a bit more. So I started to work on this series called Masquerade, which looked at, you know, these queer stereotypes, or especially with gay men that exist, and how they're labeled based upon how they act, or even just how they exist in life. And so things like the monster, or sort of that person who sort of exists in between gender, you know, a lot of non-binary people sort of are, I know like the use of it is used a lot in the past, especially in Newfoundland, when someone's androgynous or non-binary, which is not good. You have the fairy, or, you know, basically the limp wrist queer. Oh no, I don't have all of them. You have like the predator, you know, the one who's out to get the children, the attention seeker, the one who's sort of showing off all the time. And so I created these series of gum oil prints, which is a alternative photo process that uses, instead of silver salts to create your image, it uses potassium dichromate and gum arabic. And when those two are mixed together and exposed to light, the gum arabic hardens. So what you can do is you can mix in pigments with that gum arabic, and so you can get different colored layers. Or what I did for this series was that I used that gum arabic as a resist. And sort of like litho, where oil and water doesn't mix, the hardened gum doesn't like oil. So you take oil paint, or you expose your image as a negative, take oil paint and you rub it in, and then underwater you sponge off the excess, and then you get a positive image with these velvety blacks. So I created these sort of, I call them like monstrosities, or these like sort of scary looking photographs to sort of talk about this experience that I was going through. And I would say even like this series itself was that in-between series. I had gotten home, I wanted to work more on the mummer, but I wanted to talk about how, where I wanted to sort of remove myself from the mummer and have other people dress up in the outfits. And so I ended up getting the Cox and Palmer grant that was mentioned earlier, and I was working on a series of photographing other people in the mummer outfits in the Newfoundland landscape. And this was sort of like an in-between series I had done, sort of just to respond to those feelings that I was going through. And at the time too, I was also starting to perform in Newfoundland, where some of these outfits that I was making, I ended up figuring out performances for them. One of the first ones here is the Queer Mummer in 3 Acts, which happened at Union House Arts in Port Union, Newfoundland and Labrador, where I essentially did a striptease, where I dressed myself up as a regular mummer and then slowly took things off in a burlesque style to reveal the queer mummer. Excuse me. I did a parody song of not a traditional Newfoundland song, but a Irish song. I Had a Hat, and then I did a lip sync, which is sort of what drag performers do nowadays, only apparently. And that was Getting Jiggy With It by Will Smith. But you know, during this time, it was a really scary moment for me. It was my first time I was bringing the mummer into an extreme rural community. And by extreme rural, I mean, there's probably about 100 people or less that live in Port Union now. It's just right outside of Bonavista Vista, which actually is a big deal for me because I wasn't born in Bonavista Vista, but my family lived in Bonavista Vista at the time. So people recognize my name and were like, oh, I haven't seen you since you were literally like 18 months old. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a crossdresser now. I'm like, whoa, surprise. So, you know, it was a big deal, but the reception was great. And I think it was during this time that those feelings that I had during Masquerade, the series I was making, a lot of that was sort of pressure put on to me by family members and by people that were close to me, whereas people within the community itself didn't really care or even thought it was great. So I started to get this reimagining in my head about the sort of stereotypes that rural communities have put upon them, and that they're extremely homophobic and not accepting of anything. And as someone who lives in a rural community now, I can say that like most of the places have been extremely accepting. And I think it's a really unfair stereotype that sort of exists on those communities. You know, whereas, you know, I can go to St. John's and do this performance workout, which is based off of Richard Simmons and Jane Fonda and all those amazing workout videos, but done outdoors to rough trade. And, you know, the reactions not being as good. Well, you know, walking down the street and people like honking their horns and you don't know what the reaction is to that. Whereas, you know, in a rural community, you have like old grandmothers coming up and being like, "Oh, I love the knitting," you know? So it's I don't know. That's just my own experience from there. But with this performance here, it was a 3-hour time slot, and every on the hour I would do a 20-minute workout routine, and so I was dead at the end of it. I stressed out about it so much beforehand, like I had to like choreograph a bunch of stuff which I'm not used to, and then got together with a team so that we all knew the dance moves or all the workout. And I think it was during this performance that I kind of, I don't know, thinking of like the prompt of burning yourself out and stuff, I realized it wasn't something that I really enjoyed. Even though like there is a great energy of doing it at the time, the amount of stress that I would go through before actually having to go ahead with these projects, I didn't see a reason to it, you know, where if I could control everything and do it beforehand and make sure everything looked good and then send out into the world, that itself was a lot better for me and my mental well-being. So this was actually one of the last performances I did. Also, note the year. There's also another reason why. But this one was the last one, funny enough, in Sackville, where I am now. I remember Quebec Theater, which sort of took inspiration from Mr. Dress Up and Pee-wee's Playhouse, all these television shows that have sort of some soft queerness to them, I would say. You know, something you can't really put your nose on that seems right. But it was something that, you know, I had made this outfit for as well. Again, crazy deadlines I put myself through. I think I finished this in 2 months. And it was during this time that I was like, you know, I need to give myself more time to make these outfits. I was applying for grants where I would say, I'm going to make 8 distinct full body mummer outfits within 6 months. I don't think those two things add up, right, in terms of timeline, especially for giving yourself breaks. And so I quickly learned during this that I had to like give myself a proper amount of time to actually sit down, make it work at a good pace, and then give myself breaks in between. I then started to photograph some of these outfits in the Newfoundland landscape. And again, I had friends dressing up in these outfits, and it was quite a lot of fun. But then something happened where I could not get together with others. So I had to scrap the project. You know, but that's fine. You know, I think the pandemic for me in the beginning, especially, sort of refreshed my batteries. It was like I was almost burnt out, essentially, with the mummer. I was starting to hate to do it, but the pandemic itself gave me an opportunity to like work on other things, to relax, to bake bread, to play a lot of Animal Crossing. And it was during this time that I started to think of other things I could do and sort of maintain this I guess activist role within my practice without putting myself out there constantly. Because I think that's one of the issues with the mummer, is that it's always me out in the front of things, whereas I can't just like sit back and let people absorb the work and then talk to me about it afterwards. During this time too, I'm that person, I hyperfixate on mediums, and I like to learn a new medium whenever I'm trying a new project. And I just really wanted to get into rug hooking. You know, I thought it would be great to pair rug hooking and crochet together, because they use essentially the same tools, most of the same materials. And there's a long history of rug hooking in the East Coast, especially within Newfoundland. And so I decided that I kind of wanted to do that. So I started this project called Queer Newfoundland Hockey League, which explored sports and hegemonic masculinity. It wasn't around this time, but a bit beforehand was the time when Don Cherry made the comments about refugees and immigrants, and had been quote unquote canceled or fired from his job because he was a racist prick. And, you know, I thought it was quite, I don't know, it bothered me that it took this long for the repercussions for him for that to happen to him, when he had been saying homophobic stuff on the air for years. You know, if European players didn't want to fight, he called them pansies and sissies. You know, he'd even go after like liberals for being pinkos, which is an old term for like a communist, but also exists within a larger slur used against queer people. So I felt it was quite hypocritical for that to happen, and that to be like the straw that broke the camel's back. And that sort of was floating in my head. And you still had the issue at the time of no players in at least the NHL coming out, because this toxic culture existed where, you know, on the ice and in the locker rooms, players would call each other these words, and sometimes they didn't mean anything by it, or they weren't homophobic themselves, but they still used this language, and it trickled down to the kids, you know? So, you know, I think I should talk about hegemonic masculinity quickly. It was theorized by R.W. O'Connell, and it basically says there's multiple types of masculinity that exist, but there is a dominant form within our society and within different parts of our culture, like in sports. And that dominant form of masculinity emphasizes violence, homophobia, emotional restraint, and success and achievement over everything else. So you have to win. You know, you can't stand out if you are in a team for bad reasons. You know, if you're a good player, that's a good reason to stand out. But if you're going through a divorce at home, you can't stand out, right? If you have a drinking problem and you need to take care of it, you can't discuss it. So it was something that, you know, it still exists in hockey, and even today we still see it. You know, you look at Hockey Canada and their problems at the moment with sexual assault and the NDAs that are happening. You know, so it's still a part of the culture, and it's something that needs to change. And so I felt like calling it out in a tongue-in-cheek way was sort of important. And it traces all the way back to, you know, Jacques Plante, when he started to wear a goalie mask, with players and coaches and fans ridiculing him for choosing to protect his face over constantly being bludgeoned by pucks. And he even said that, like, you wouldn't skydive without a parachute, so why would you go in front of the net without protection, right? And it was just this toxic idea of, like, you aren't a man if you aren't putting yourself in danger. So I decided to start creating these hockey jerseys that took some of the language that was used on the ice and the locker rooms, and took it and used it as the team names. You know, a lot of times, and during this time too, was the controversies of sports teams being named after slurs, especially like Indigenous communities, and sort of calling that out as well. So I wanted to use these terms sort of to make people understand, like, oh, like this is something that's still happening, and get a laugh out of them, but then also make them think about it. So the first one here is Cornbrook Queens. This one's actually completely based off of in terms of the logo, it steals a bit from the Blackhawks, which is sort of the only team that exists, I think now, correct me if I'm wrong, that still has sorry, that was a fly or something, that still has some like stereotypes within it about Indigenous communities. But with this one, I took some imagery from the Newfoundland hockey leagues, because I had family members who played in those, and hockey is huge in Newfoundland. It wasn't until I was in like Saskatoon and in Sackville here that I realized that football was a big thing in Canada. I always thought that was just an American thing, but people play football here, and I was like, what? It's not just hockey? Yeah, I decided to focus on hockey for this. And it's, I guess, mostly what I know too, because I used to collect hockey cards as a kid. I used to watch a lot of hockey, but I fell out of it because of the culture. And so the jersey itself is also inspired by the Corner Brook Royals. Before I moved to Saskatoon, I was living in Corner Brook, so this team means a lot to me. And actually, my cousin ended up buying it because her father played with the Corner Brook Royals, which is really cute. And for this jersey too, I decided to lean upon one of the traditional techniques in Newfoundland cooking, which is using old pantyhose. In the past, it was silk stockings. Can't really find those these days, so I just used, good old pantyhose. And I used pantyhose that I had worn as the queer mummer for this look. The next one is the Come By Chance Flamers. Come By Chance is a town with a big oil refinery in Newfoundland. And when you drive by, you just see this big old flame in the distance. And so I kind of wanted to play with that. Also create this phallic symbol out of the refinery. The oil companies love their phalluses. The Pasadena pansies. And this pansy design, they made it look a little mean. It's not, completely traditional pansy. It's just a little, I guess, a mutant version. But, I kind of wanted to make it look like it had a mean face. And the colors, I should talk about the colors at this point. I noticed, I was a big fan of hockey in the 90s as a young kid and a bit in the 2000s. And during those years, you started to see a lot of the colors in the jerseys started to change. So specifically, a lot of teams that use purple. So the Los Angeles Kings, the San Jose Sharks, sorry, Anaheim Mighty Ducks, the Phoenix Coyotes, all those teams started to remove purple from their jerseys. And it's even gotten to a point within hockey these days that a lot of teams only have red, blue, or black as their colors. And I think it kind of talks about, I don't know if it's just jersey design, they can't think of any other colors, but it sort of talks about the issue around gender and gendering color. You never see pink, you don't see purple anymore, or if you do, it's a vintage jersey. They don't want any of the teams to have them. So I kind of wanted to call that out at the same time. So this jersey design is sort of based off the old LA Kings, but also there is a Newfoundland team, the Gander Flyers, that has these colors. The Port Union Pinkos. At this time, I started to go crazy with the colors. So I wanted to design a pink jersey that could look really good and be usable in the league. So that's sort of what I did for this one. I use the term pinko because it's used within the slur Call Me Pinko Fag, and that's just too long of a slur to use as a team name. So I shortened it to Pinkos. And I picked Port Union because Port Union was a union established town. And so a lot of, I guess, socialists and communists were in that area of the town or of the province. So it kind of fit the vibe. Leading Tickles Lesbos, again, playing with color here. Dildo Dykes. We do have a town named Dildo in Newfoundland. It's, the joke of Newfoundland itself. My favorite team, the Thoreau Island Fag Hags. The Fag Hag Maces return. And we have the Bonavista Buggers. At this time, too, I kind of wanted to start use terms that I used in normal day speaking. My grandfather would call me a foolish bugger all the time. And I don't think he knew that bugger was a homophobic slur. But, I just, towards the end of it, I thought it was really funny. And I started to sort of identify as a foolish bugger. We have the St. John Sissies. And this team actually uses the pantyhose of a drag queen who's now TikTok famous, which is really funny. But Sammy Landry's pantyhose. We have the Fairyland Fairies, again, using these colors. Francois fruits. In Newfoundland, there's a lot of French town names, but because not many people speak French anymore in Newfoundland, a lot of these names have been bastardized. And so one of them would be pronounced Francois usually, but we pronounce it Francois. And I feel like I have to flick my wrist whenever I say Francois. That's just the Francois. So I don't know, that's sort of why I chose that one. Coxoscope Queeros, and named Nancy's, and the Gay Side Gaylords. And I should talk about Gay Side because I think it talks about homophobia in Newfoundland to the most extent. Gay Side was a town in Newfoundland that existed, and it existed up until 1986 when the town voted to change its name because it was the butt end of jokes about it being called Gay Side. People will talk about how the queer the town is and all that. And so they voted to change the name of the town to Baytona. Not a good name. Yeah, Gay Side was so much better. And, it's a part of the province's history now that, you had a town that changed its name because of homophobic jokes. So I felt like it was important to sort of have this classic looking jersey, not just a jersey design you see much these days, but it was something you see back in the 1910s and 20s with the Ottawa Senators. But, this team itself, I felt like was important to memorialize Gay Side and make sure that people sort of knew about it. During this project, again, this is 14 jerseys. So let's talk about Lucas's body. Okay, this is the body talk and making sure you don't burn yourself out. So I started this project, I think it was March 2020 when I started to get things together. I kind of got a grant for it, or I applied for a grant right before the pandemic hit, but I sort of knew we were going into a pandemic. I was gonna have to find something to do if things are to close. So luckily, I think it was actually May when I got the money. So I officially started it then. And, I was making jersey and logo, probably one jersey every month or two. And, clothing takes a long time to crochet and rug hooking especially. If you thought to sit and crochet all the time was bad for your body, with rug hooking, if you don't have a proper setup, you're kind of scrunched up like this, head close to the to your matrix, pulling piles. So I ended up really destroying my body during this time. I moved to Sackville in the summer of 2020, and I was lucky enough that a student approached me asking if they could be my studio assistant for course credit. And I was like, yeah, if that's the trade-off and the university is paying you a scholarship to do this, I'm fine with it. and she herself was a rug cooker, so it alleviated that pressure for me. But still, I would, I know I finished a jersey one time in 1 week, and that's not healthy. That was during the 2020 election in the US, so I was pretty stressed out about what was happening. So I ended up finishing a whole jersey that was Dillo Dykes. But by the end of it, I ended up getting shingles because of stress, and I ended up in the hospital a few times because I had thought I was having like blood clots. So my body was just reacting to the stress I was putting myself through. And at that time, my mental health was in the dumps. I had so much anxiety, especially about my body failing me. And, I was like, what am I going to do? I ended up getting a cat, and she really has helped with that stuff, especially the anxiety. But I started to like look after my body. I think it's important to work out if you can, if it even it's just going for walks. And I ended up starting to slow down my pace with things, especially when it comes to like applying for grants. I really want to take into account how much I can make within a certain amount of time. And I'm no longer scared to ask for an extension for grants. I ended up asking for one for the hockey league because 14 jerseys is just, it's not going to happen within 6 months. I should have learned that from the last project, but I didn't. So, I got an extension. That was great. And I got everything done on time. Funny enough, I haven't submitted the report because they have my profile stuck on a jury profile and I can't submit it. But I don't live in Newfoundland anymore, so let's just forget that. I have all the stuff written up and stuff. I just can't submit it. But it really made me put into account my abilities to get things done and my mental health throughout the times. I really gravitated towards crochet because it was very therapeutic, having this very repetitive process. I could sit down, and if I was stressed out or anxious at the time, it would really help with that. But it was, and it still is, heartbreaking to have that practice sort of taken away from me in a sense. And it's something I can't really rely on anymore to overcome those feelings because they sort of onset them. I'll wake up and my neck is bad, and then things will spiral from there. I've sort of learned strategies for taking care of myself. I do work at an artisan center where I do have health benefits. So I go to acupuncture every month now. I found that's really helped. My brother's a chiropractor, and I've tried chiropractic practices. They work, but at the same time, I feel like the acupuncture is doing a bit more for me than chiropractic. But taking care of myself had become a part of my practice at this point as well. I also pushed myself to make these hockey cards, which put more stress on me, right? Because I had to make all these different characters for them. And at a certain point, I said, well, I have my studio assistant. If she steps in and I have her as some of the characters, and that's less stress on me. And it's a bit more fun because I get to put someone else in drag. And I really enjoyed that. So, and I found a strategy too of like, I can become multiple characters at once in a day. So specifically on top row, the Fogo Island Fag Hags, Roshan Fagan, that was shot the same day as the Fairyland Fairies, Siobhan O'Connell. So Siobhan's was shot first, and then I ended up just putting green on my under eye and changed the lipstick, and there you go. And put a wig on. There's a whole different look. the Gay Side Gaylords and the Francois Fruits, that was shot on the same day as well. And again, it's just sort of figuring out ways at the time that I could change up looks very quickly without ruining, having to take off the makeup and put it back on because it takes hours. Some of the exposures are off on this, but I have fixed them. And this is like an early draft of the photos, I should say. I'm using an older PowerPoint because I'm using a work computer. And you know, I've learned that as fun as it is to have all of this amount of work, to have like a full exhibition to fill out a space, those usually take a lot longer to put together than I thought, or I thought my body could handle. And so that really had become important for me to sort of realize. And also in terms of like making that much work, you got to find storage space for it too. So if you live in an apartment, good luck, right? That's why I don't paint or anything like that. Fiber art can fold up, it's great. I also made goalie doilies at the time for these. And originally I was going to make 14 of them. You can kind of see the process where I have the doilies here, and on the right side, there's a cast of a face that they sit upon. But what I ended up doing is I did an artist residency in Port Hope, Ontario, and I would just crochet these doilies while I was there, right? And if I needed a break, I'd go and cast one of the faces. But I got to number 10, and you know, I laid them out like this, and I thought, you know, I'm done. I don't need any more. You know, I think the message is said by the work. I don't need to have the exact same number as the number of jerseys I have here. So, you know, sometimes less is more. You know, give your work breathing room. But at the same time, I wasn't done with the mummer. So I ended up moving to Sackville, and I work at Struts Gallery now, where I'm the production manager. And in my role as the production manager, I get access to so much cool equipment. So I'm in charge of, like, you know, video cameras and audio gear and lighting and stuff. So I had all these things available to me. So I said, let's start making some video work. So the first thing I did was just, I call this a little test. It's a lip sync / the burlesque routine that I did to PJ Harvey's Meet the Monster, but I called it Meet the Mummer. And yeah, this was sort of a tester for me just to get back into video work. And from there, I started to apply for another grant while I'm working on another. You know, bad work habits here. And I started to make a series of video performances. So there's a way for me to have these performances exist, but in a way that I want them to, with all the cheesy filters that I want to make it look like it was filmed in the 90s, right? So the first one I made was Workout. So this is now like a 15-minute video. And instead of just using Rough Trade music, I ended up doing covers of Rough Trade songs. So you could hear my horrible singing in the background with like really cheesy 80s music. It's great. You know, filmed myself 3 times in the dead of, like, during a heat wave in last year. Obviously that full wool outfit wasn't fun to wear. I was having a hard time with the singlets. Imagine how hard it was with the full body wool, even in the corset as well. And yeah, I think this is my last slide here, but I've continued on to make a few more. I've made a video of a part of that puppet theater video, and that one's a lot more like, I say Mr. Dress Up or something. You know, there's a craft time where I'm making the puppet, and there's a talking mirror, sort of referencing, like, I guess Pee-wee's Playhouse, but also one of the original queer villains, the talking mirror from Snow White. And I just recently, or right now, I'm working on essentially 2 parody songs that are being performed by a fake band on a talk show, like a late night talk show. So that's the video I'm working on right now. I am making myself aware of the weather when I film. I don't film on sunny, hot days like today because I don't want to pass out while I'm filming. And especially with the outfit I'm wearing, it has like just an opening right here and the rest is wool. So it doesn't really work that well in hot days. And it's acrylic yarn, which I don't usually work with these days. So it's a lot hotter than wool yarn. And I also made a video that's a reference to Tom Rubman's work, who made Pickle Surprise, The Strawberry Shortcut. Yeah, so that's sort of what I've done recently. And now I'm working on another series, and it's based off of wrestling. But I think it's important to know, like, I have had a roller coaster of a year this year, right? A lot of great things have happened, but I have had 2 people close to me that passed away. And that really put the brakes on to my progress in a lot of this work. But at the same time, it's really made me reflect about my work ethic. And, it's great to push yourself to the limits, but constantly doing that is going to destroy your engine or destroy your body all the time, right? So it's really become important for me to be aware of how I'm working now these days. Making sure that I'm taking breaks, making sure I'm sitting in the right position. Me like hunched over here is not good for my back right now, but I can fix that later. And sort of learning, exercises and stretches to make sure that my body is able to function the next day, right? I got one of those foam rollers and just rolling my spine on that, so great. I have this weird like pillow now that folds my neck back a bit. It's really good for my neck. And then also just going on acupuncture dates with my acupuncturist. You get cupped. It's fantastic. It looks like I've got attacked by a squid or an octopus. Maybe Inky Twinkie attacked me, and I got all these little suction marks. But it's great for my back. So that's really become something that's really important to my practice, and trying to take things slow, because I felt that rushing things, obviously you're going to miss details, you're going to skip over things. And as a perfectionist as well, like that really stresses me out to try to be a perfectionist within a really short period of time. So allowing myself that space to breathe and to get work done has become really important. That said, I told myself I'll make 8 of these wrestling outfits. So have I fully learned my lesson? I didn't say 14 this time. So I do know my limits, and I'm using machine knitting, so it's not going to be as bad on me. But I've compromised, right? I still have this high number of things I want to make, but I said we're not going to do it all handmade where I have to be in an uncomfortable position forever. I'm going to use a new process to me, but also use something that I can get things done quickly. So if I'm on a deadline, it's going to be easier to get those things done. I want to go back to the questions or the prompts. So how do you balance activist work with your own well-being? I don't know. For me, before this, I had done work. I didn't really talk about this in the beginning, but I was making like light installations, almost like James Turrell, talking about mental health. And I liked doing them, but they weren't fun to make. And for me, I feel like if you're not having fun with your art practice, then you're going to burn yourself out quickly, right? You're going to become disinterested with what you're working in. And so for me, it was important to if I was working on activist-based work, to make sure that I was having fun while doing it, because it's quite heavy work. You're dealing with heavy subject matters. A lot of times you might be talking about your own experiences, and that could be traumatic. And to find a way to make it fun and enjoyable while working on it is really important. And I guess I've really enjoyed just taking on this jester role, where I'm sort of making fun of things, but I'm also pointing to serious issues at the same time. How can you take up an activist role while ensuring you don't burn yourself out? I'm still learning that, right? I think that's something that we all are still learning, especially in this pandemic. I'm sure a lot of us have experienced burnout, having to constantly plan things and then at the last minute change it because there's a new lockdown, or one of your coworkers or yourself, you get COVID. And so everything's put on hold and you're really stressed out about it. I'm still learning this as well, as I said. But for me, one of the big things is always finding something new to learn. And I like thinking about this wrestling project I'm working on. I chose machine knitting, which is brand new to me. And it's something that I'm having fun doing. Now, mind you, I haven't touched it since February, but that's because of the grieving period I'm going through. And so that's also part of how do you balance activist work with your own well-being? If you're grieving, it's probably not good to work on that stuff that's gonna make you upset, you know? Find something else to work on that will keep you productive. And I think most granting bodies these days are really understanding to these issues. And if they bounce back at me and say, you're supposed to be working on this, what can I do? I've had people pass away in my life, right? So, or I had stuff come up that has pushed the project back. It's not like I'm not working on it. But yeah, I think that burnout thing is really important, and it creeps up so quick. So making sure to take breaks, and a proper break, you can't be working on your practice at all. You have to basically take a vacation and relax. I tend to play video games in like my spare time, and I've really started to critique that personally. I used to see it as like, oh, here's me relaxing, but my brain isn't fully relaxing, right? I'm still really stressed out about this, I don't know, this dungeon I'm playing in Zelda or something. So I'm still getting those like anxious feelings, or those emotions that can contribute to burnout, right? So I think a lot of times unplugging, going for walks, and finding things just to refresh your mind is extremely important for that. And then how do you make your work accessible and understandable? I always want to, I'm gonna talk some shit here. I have a lot of friends who've gone to NASCAD. I don't want to call it NASCAD, but there's some universities that really focus on theory. And I think theory is great. I use theory a lot within my work, whether it be talking about like Judith Butler's stuff on gender performativity, or R.W. Connell with hegemonic masculinity. But a wide part of the audience not get that theory looking at the work. And so I feel like within my own practice, I've always felt it was important to make my work accessible, not by being pedantic and explaining everything, but sort of making something that's sort of understandable right away, but then has these hidden layers as you look deeper. So that there's an immediate reaction to the work, and a lot of times it's humor, but then within that, you're kind of questioning, why am I laughing, right? What about this makes it funny, and should I be laughing at it? So that's sort of been a bit of my approach there. But I think in the case by case, it's going to be different for each person, right? And each medium, because if you're doing video work, it's going to be a bit easier to probably do some of that theoretical stuff and get it into your viewer's head. But then also, I mean, you can also make work about specific audiences, but then find ways to make it relatable with everyone else. I know not every Canadian knows Newfoundland stuff, but I think people are interested in Newfoundland culture at least. So focusing on little funny jokes that Newfoundlanders find funny, but then in a broad sense, I think people can connect to is important as well. So for example, I just made a video piece, Jam Padam, and in it I use a bunch of products. I have the labels removed, but it's a bunch of products by a brand called Purity, which is Newfoundland like food brand. And so, just having those small little references sort of, make people relate to the work a bit. It's kind of hard when you're working with brands though, like don't want to put the brand in the work because you don't want to get sued for copyright stuff, but then you want to reference it. You could always just say screw it and do it, but yeah, I don't know. I think I want people to talk, so I'm at the point where I'm like, what does everyone else feel? How is everyone feeling, right?
I just wanted to say quickly before we have any discussion, like, thank you, Lucas, for like leading us today in your talk. We're like really grateful for you to be here.
Thank you for having me. I feel
Yeah.
like, yeah.
And to be able to learn from you is really great. So thank you. And yeah, let's open it up for any discussion or questions that anybody has.